Welcome to the ISTAT Learning Lab. Today, we're going to talk about lessons from the COVID crisis and what's next around the corner. And the presenter today is Bert van Leeuwen, who is the Managing Director and Head of Research at the Global Aviation Finance Division of MUFG Bank. And with me in the studio, based in Dubai, is Sarah Oon, who is Head of Capital Markets and the trading team at Airbus. So the topic today is Bert is going to discuss the dynamics in the world of aviation finance, and that has been caused by COVID and the impact on commercial aviation, and in particular aircraft values and liquidity and tradability of aircraft. And looking back, he will discuss market changes that were actually predictable prior to the crisis, and looking forward, what factors may result in a new crisis or extension of the current crisis, and what this means for values. Bert is responsible for the bank's aviation market, airline and asset analysis activities, and he's a regular speaker at aviation conferences all over the world with subjects ranging from aircraft value dynamics and aircraft remarkability to cargo conversions and aircraft engine finance. In 1983, Bert started his career with NIBC Bank as a business consultant and became a co-founder of NIBC's aircraft finance department. After 10 years in aviation, offshore energy, and intermodal equipment research for several Dutch banks, he joined Aircraft Operating Lessor IEM in 2001 to head up the market research business development department. In 2003, Bert joined DVB Bank and became responsible for the aviation research unit. And that division of DVB was acquired in 2019 by MUFG in Japan, including the research unit, which was left unchanged. Bert has a degree in business economics from Erasmus University in Rotterdam. I also want to say I've enjoyed working with Bert for many, many years. And I think we're in for a very, very interesting presentation. During this presentation, you can post questions by clicking the little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and post those in writing. And then Sarah will go to those questions after Bert's presentation. So with that, I want to hand over to Bert van Leeuwen.
Thank you, Niels. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Niels, thank you very much for this introduction, and I'm glad you remembered, let's say, the early days when we were still in this business in our younger years. And I remember doing some deals, including conversion, I think, of DC-863s into freighters. That's a long time ago. But as this industry goes in cycles, we are now looking at conversion programs taking off again. So again, thanks for the introduction. I'll start the presentation, hopefully with this click. Yeah, perfect. I hope it works. Excellent. So yes, again, good afternoon. There we are in a nice little mess here, or a big mess actually, that was caused in 2020 by the COVID virus. So it's a crisis, unprecedented, I guess, for at least for my generation. And what I would like to do is to talk you through how we've seen this crisis develop from a, let's say, an asset financier's perspective, an aircraft financier's perspective, and look at what it did to aircraft values, liquidity, and maybe to make it a little bit more useful to everybody to also look at potential things to come after this crisis, of course. So we go to the usual. I hope the screen. It seems that my screen is a little bit stuck here. I'm sorry about that. There we go. Yeah, it's. I wanted to read that disclaimer first before I share it with you. So there we go. This is obviously something that most of us have seen maybe too often already. It's the number of daily COVID cases, the cycles, the peaks and troughs that we've seen over the past almost year and a half. And unfortunately, there were also, apart from people that got ill by the virus, also people that died. Very, very tragic, of course. And that's probably that's absolutely the worst part of this thing, apart from all the economic let's say pain. This is much worse. It's interesting to look at this. It's a cycle that, somehow it looks a bit randomly. And unfortunately, while we thought that with the vaccination that started a couple of months ago, depending on which country you live, that we would get ahead of that virus, now it looks like we are starting again at a new start of a new peak, a new cycle. At least here in the Northern Hemisphere, in Western Europe. The country I live in, that's the Netherlands, over the past few days, we've seen actually a quite fast increase in the number of cases. While we understand in the Southern Hemisphere, it's improving. So it's not over yet. It's a crisis that, of course, affected the economy and also the aviation business. And I think that after many years of what we called or some people call a super cycle in commercial aviation, this was really unexpected thing to happen. And it's, it is now, we can say, the worst crisis in commercial aviation since the Second World War. What happened is quite unusual, that demand was undermined by, first of all, the publicity and the fear of flying, but not only the fear of flying and getting infected, but it's also, and that's strange, it's the risk of being infected when you would arrive at your destination. So not only the fear of flying that we have seen in during the times that there was a war or terrorism going on, it's now also that people didn't like to go anywhere else because of the fear that they may be affected or they couldn't return. And then on top of that fear of flying and going to a destination, also the governments added travel bans that would especially undermine international travel. So again, we've seen some relaxing of the limitations. Intra-European flying is possible. We hope, and I still hope actually, that as of November 8, we are still allowed to travel, to fly to the United States without, let's say, excessive requirements of quarantine, etc. But yeah, it's a bit uncertain now that we see this spreading of the virus again in Northwestern Europe. So apart from the, this slide, this is probably also one that a lot of you have seen. This is, I find this a very useful instrument. This is Flight Radar 24. That's a website, or it's a company that is tracking the number of commercial flights on a daily basis. And so it's almost real time. And here you see the 3 lines that are representing 3 years. The number of flights for each and every day in 2019 is in red. Then in blue, it's the 2020, and in black, the 2021 number. So as you can see, it started here at the normal level. We got COVID, it's a huge dip in number of flights daily. It started to recover somewhat, and I'd say towards August, September 19, it stabilizes a bit. Then we have a gradual climb up to where we are now, which is around 81%. And you see the last 7-day average is moving down a little bit. I hope that's not going to continue. That's going to depend on a lot of decisions, mainly made by the politicians. We saw a dip earlier in the year caused by a closure of the Chinese domestic market. We move on from this. I think this is a chart that I find was very spectacular. It shows the magnitude of the dip caused by the COVID virus, the pandemic, and it shows it in a historical perspective. This is the passengers, domestic, international, in total. And it also, this chart shows you what the impact has been on previous, I could, it's almost difficult to describe them as crises, because in this chart they look like minor dips. But I can tell you from experience, certainly the Gulf crisis, the Asian crisis, the 9/11 attack, SARS, were certainly not minor dips when you were living through them and you saw the impact on the business. But they are kind of dwarfed by the impact of the COVID crisis. According to ICAO, that's where this chart was borrowed from, we can expect a decline in total world total passengers this year of about 50% versus the last pre-crisis year 2019. And that was last year, 2020, was a decline of 60%. So it's a slight improvement. Clearly, the main culprit from let's say the recovery being quite slow is international travel, and in particular long-haul intercontinental. This shows the IATA chart, which is a little bit more focusing into what's happening in this year compared to the year 2019, the last pre-crisis year. This chart, well, it shows passenger revenue passenger kilometers measured for the production of passenger transport product, and it shows the cargo ton kilometers, so for the freighter business. Let's start with the positive picture, and that's the red line, which is the cargo and cargo ton kilometers. Quite interesting, this has moved in a positive direction. So even compared to the last pre-crisis year, it's growing. It grew initially at quite a high percent, but still it's increasing at quite decent numbers over the year. It's about 7.9%. Then we have the domestic passenger revenue, but that's this line with the red diamonds. It's in gray. You saw a nice gradual increase, so we're quite optimistic about that. And then suddenly, in between July and August this year, we saw some measures. I think it was mainly coming from the Chinese market, where domestic flights were again limited. And you could see that while we were approaching the pre-crisis level in July at only minus 15.6%, in August it dropped to 32.2%, giving a year average of around 13.5% below the 2019. It's a pity. I had hoped to be able to present the IATA numbers for September. There's always a bit of a time lag between IATA publishing their traffic results and the actual month that it happened, because it's quite interesting to see if we can expect a continuation of this trend or whether it's going to be depressed. International passenger traffic, that's the black this gray line, the lower line with the triangles. It's still quite low compared to 2019. We're on average, we're almost 82% down still. And I guess only when we'll see the opening of an important market like the transatlantic, that we'll get a more positive movement. Overall, it's set about 60% down. Of course, apart from air traffic, the COVID fear, also the state of the economy is an important factor determining the ability and willingness of people to fly. And clearly, in 2020, the market, the global economy was strongly negatively impacted by the COVID crisis. But actually, the recovery this year has been surprisingly strong. It seems that governments all over the world and the way they have handled this crisis actually seem to work this time, at least for the time being. And we see a bounce back in demand. Of course, during the crisis, we've seen people ordering online rather than going to the shopping mall, and instead of going on holiday, maybe buying, I don't know, new furniture. Or at least it was a pretty good recovery. Unfortunately, there's always a bit of, it's a blue sky, but there's always some clouds. The International Monetary Fund in their latest report said the global recovery continues, but they see that the momentum has a bit weakened and there are more uncertainties now. And I guess that's uncertainties probably caused by the virus, because it's very difficult to predict what's happening next. Maybe we have a new mutant. There's talk about a Delta plus variant. But there are still a lot of uncertainties. But for the time being, I would say I'm quite positively surprised by what we've seen so far, and let's say in this year in terms of economic recovery. Obviously, there are still some logistic disruptions. So as we have all seen, microchips, it's difficult to get enough of them to put in domestic appliances in cars. The logistics in the maritime business, especially the maritime containers, is still very much disrupted. Containers are not the empty containers are not where they're supposed to be. There's a lot of waiting time in the ports, and that is of course one of the reasons why we've seen this significant improvement of the business environment in air cargo. It's not only the lack of belly capacity in passenger aircraft, but it's also the fact that this maritime container business is completely disrupted at the moment, and it's expected that this will last for at least another year or so. While we have the COVID crisis and we focus on this as a major disruptor, commercial aviation, obviously in the past always has been influenced very heavily, at least the bottom lines of the airline, by the fuel price, the price of jet fuel, and let's say as the raw material, crude oil. While I was about a year ago, I think the oil price looked like it was in some areas of the world were turning negative. So basically, if you were to take a barrel of oil, we get some money in addition. Those times are clearly over. And we see now a significant increase in demand for energy products, including, for instance, natural gas shortage, which has led to increases in price. Now, it's always difficult to make any forecasts about oil prices, I've learned. I mean, there's people that spend their career studying this, and they come up with all kinds of interesting forecasts. And usually they hardly ever come out. It's like an economist. You can predict whatever you like, but it's probably reality is so complex that it's not going to be realized after all. But apart from the demand issue, of course, from COVID, we really have to keep a close eye on what's happening to the oil price. And I think already some airline CEOs have indicated that if this continues, if the oil price stays at this high level, that could have a significant impact of the profitability and the ability of the airlines to recover from the COVID crisis. So also another element of uncertainty that we need to watch quite carefully. Interest rates, I hope you can see it. It's a thin line. They're still quite low. There's bits of ups and downs. They seem to be moving a little bit up. And interest rates obviously are also quite important element for commercial aviation. First of all, the low interest rates are quite good for the airlines that have to borrow lots and lots of money to come out of this crisis, or to create sufficient liquidity to pay their bills. And it's of course also for the financial investors an important element. And for the aviation business, I would say it's not short-term decision, but capital cost versus fuel burn. If interest rates are low, you could expect that airlines are more inclined to buy newer, fuel-efficient airplanes. While if interest rates are high, then it's the break-even point is shifted a little bit, and even let's call them the gas guzzlers would be attractive in a high interest rate environment. But more relevant today, I think, is that with the increasing share of, let's say, financial players in the aviation market, it's no longer a market where airlines trade aircraft amongst each other. It's investors that do a lot of the trading. Investors are driven, of course, by the returns. And in a low interest environment, it seemed that aviation, which has been quite steadily performing positively over the last almost 10 years, has now become, it's changed from what was initially a bit of a niche market with very few players. It's now become a mainstream market for investors. And the low interest rate then shifted the attention of a lot of investors to commercial aviation. With this, it also probably has played an important role in I would say the recovery, the quick recovery of certain aircraft values. It's an interesting development that we've seen, that there seems to be a bit of a split in the market where aircraft values are being paid by investors, leasing companies, fund managers, etc., who are trying to get their hands on aircraft, additional airplanes, new airplanes or mid-life airplanes, that these values, these prices seem to have an upward tendency. Well, on the other hand, in the real, let's call that the real market, transportation market, there is still a bit of a surplus of aircraft across the board. Quite a number of airplane types are in surplus. And because of that, the airlines can exercise some pressure on the lease rates, actually, to the extent that in some cases they'll be able to renegotiate lease rates to become kind of a power by the hour structure. So you only pay your rental if you fly the airplane. So on the one hand, we see aircraft values being pushed up by investor demand. On the other hand, we see airline paying lease rates that are under pressure because of the surplus in capacity on the market. It's quite an interesting, I don't think I've seen that before. It's quite an interesting development. And of course, the effect, if this all plays out on the so-called lease rate factor, would be quite negative. Already prior to the crisis, the market was so competitive. They were talking about 0.6% lease rate factor, i.e. the lease rate you pay on a new airplane most of the time, express it as a percentage on a monthly basis. And that's, I guess, would be just worse nowadays. Okay, talking about airplanes, airplanes should be flying, should be in the air, should be transporting people, should be transporting cargo, but that's not been the case for a while. This gives you an overview of the storage rates. So the number of stored aircraft, airplanes in storage, as noted by in this case, the consultants from Syrian, and then expressed as a percentage of the total of in-service and stored airplane. Again, like the transport numbers, the RPK chart that I shared with you earlier, we see here that suddenly in early 2020, and I can remember this was, I think, right after the ISTAT conference in the Americas, airlines were withdrawing their airplanes, they were parking them, and the storage numbers reached, let's say, unprecedented levels. Depending, of course, on the type of airplane, the type of service these planes are deployed. If you look at this chart, the worst case was, in this case, the wide-body passenger jets. These aircraft obviously are flying long-haul international routes, and those are the routes that were closed down, first by fear and second by government measures. And now we can see that they're still currently at around 30-31%, so still the highest number. If you look at, in contrast, at the two red lines, which are the wide body and the narrow body freighters, I would say that the narrow body freighters are quite often used for e-commerce within the limits of a country, so domestic US, domestic China. That's where the narrow body freighters are used most often. And the wide body freighters, long haul planes flying from China to North America, to Europe. Both actually stayed at very relatively low levels in storage terms. And actually these wide body freighters, because of the lack of belly capacity in the passenger aircraft, passenger airplanes, have, of course, obviously passengers on the main deck, but they carry quite a lot of cargo in their bellies that nobody really sees when you're flying to your holiday destination or to your business appointment. But because of all these wide-body passenger jets, they were grounded. Then that caused a shortage, and airlines actually in some cases flew just with cargo in the belly. That's this. And we come back on that. This term that was kind of invented, the so-called freighter, it's a crossover of passenger airplanes and freighters, that some airlines decided that because of the shortage in belly capacity and actually also the shortage in wide-body freighter capacity, because they're all taken by, let's say, by the airlines, cargo airlines to fly that surplus cargo that came out of the maritime container market. Those airplanes were then, the passenger airplanes were then deployed purely for cargo transport, and some of them with the cargo in the belly, some of them with cargo in boxes basically attached to the seats, and somewhere the main deck seats were taken out and replaced by pallets where cargo was on. So that's the dynamic there. And then the category that's kind of is looking like it's going to recover now well, quite fast, and that's the narrow-body passenger jet. That's clearly aircraft that are used mainly for short haul, and that could be in North America domestic, it could be in China domestic, but let's say Southeast Asia, there could be that's relatively short haul international operations. Here in Europe, the same thing. This would be plane flying mainly with, well, let's say business people between Berlin and London, or with holiday goers between Copenhagen and Mallorca. So those are coming back. And then the blue line, the regional passenger jet, it doesn't look like it's a spectacular recovery, and actually it's still a very high storage percentage. But look at the origin of that curve. That category of airplanes, which are the CRJs and the E-jets, it started already at a relatively high storage percentage prior to the crisis. So there is a bit of a recovery, and it's expected that, well, because there's probably going to be a whole lot of airplanes that are not really that viable any longer. I would say airplanes like the ERJ-145, CRJ-200s, they were stored and are still in storage, and I don't think we'll see that number come down anytime soon. This is to give a bit of an impression on the individual airplane types. So we moved from the general picture to the categories now to individual airplane types, where we have the storage in this chart, both in numbers and in percentage of the fleet. So a high gray bar means that there is a lot of those airplanes in storage. And obviously that it's quite clear that a aircraft that is very popular, like an A320, there's a huge fleet of thousands of those planes in operation. Even a small percentage, it's about 20–25%, it still is a lot of airplanes. Whereas you could have an airplane like, let's say, a 380, which has a significant storage percentage of 79%. It's in terms of absolute numbers, it's about 200. So that's an indication from various angles how to look at it. So we see that still a significant number of wide bodies remain in storage, and actually some of the airplane types like these 777-200, 380 as mentioned, even the 747-400, they are really high percentages, and one has to wonder whether those percentages will ever come down significantly. Of course, they can come down, but that could be then in the form because they were parted out, not because they were flyers again. That's always an interesting dynamic of the storage situation, that you can lower the number of airplanes in storage by just parting them out rather than reactivating into commercial service. Moving again to a slightly different angle on this topic, it's the leasing community in the database that we use, which is a Syrian database described as finance and professional, FMP. This gives you an overview of the share of the lessors in the global fleet for narrow-body passenger aircraft. And I must say that in the past, the lessors, when you would attend conferences like the ISTAT conference, you had a lessor presentation, most of the lessors would state that, well, yeah, wide-body airplanes, it's a bit difficult, it's less liquid, it's a concentration of risk in one asset. The transition costs are pretty high, so we'll stick to the liquid narrow-body airplanes. And indeed, we have already passed the 50% mark, and more than way over 50% of the global fleet of narrow bodies is in the hands of the lessors. It's a nice steady stream. And if you go to the wide bodies, which were, I guess, traditionally, I'm old school, earmarked as not really suitable for lessors to invest in, we do see that although it's not reached the levels of the narrow bodies yet, we do see a steady increase of the lessor percentage in the wide body airplanes. So that's something they've always, a lot of the lessors said, well, we're not going to do that. But you do see that now a number of them are really investing in wide bodies. Why is this? There were a couple of specialists lessors who basically said, well, this is the element, this is the part of the market we're going to focus on. But I think there's maybe also other instruments for leasing companies to divest a bit of the risk. I mean, the lessors definitely know about wide-body aircraft risks in terms of the liquidity and remarketing. So I think by using instruments like so-called sidecars or asset-based securitization, you could basically take a couple of wide bodies in your fleet and then divest them into the sidecars or the ABSs, and have the benefits of being able to manage those and get your management income, but you would have shared the risk then with other investment partners, which may make this more viable as a strategy. Maybe something to discuss later on. Yeah, from the storage, the next logical step is, okay, what happens to aircraft values when you see these dynamics happening? And of course, for investors, but also for bankers, this is, I guess, one of the more important elements, of course, in this commercial aviation game. Yeah, some of the airplane types. This is a chart which indicates the dollar value drop in current market value between 2019 mid-year and 2021 mid-year, and this is on a constant age basis. So while in reality an airplane then grows older, we have just taken the value of a 10-year-old airplane or an 8-year-old airplane in 2019 and an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old airplane in 2021. So the aging element has more or less been eliminated, at least the physical aging. There's always a technology aging, so the state of technology moves on, and that has an impact on the value of airplanes. Now, if you look at this chart, and especially sorted it by percentage drops, this entire range is made out of just two aircraft families, the A330 widebody and the 777 widebody, in particular the 300ER and the 330-200s. This is the passenger version. So the worst performance in this crisis, and I would say the real victims of the COVID crisis in terms of aircraft types, were these two airplanes. They were the worst hit. Question is why this has happened. Well, obviously it's because of the lack of international routes. They were basically stopped. Airlines stopped flying international routes. Are typically where these airplanes excel. But I think we saw the weakening, the softening of the values of these two airplanes already prior to the COVID crisis. It was clearly already visible that a lot of those airplanes were earmarked to be phased out by the airlines, specifically the ones that were on lease. And that's an interesting, I would say, an interesting phenomenon. That if you look at the old days, where airlines would basically be the ones that would buy their wide-body airplanes, if you have a downturn or something are not as you expected, you're kind of married to the plane, you're stuck with it, and you make it fly. It's a good example. Years ago, Lufthansa had A340-600. Yeah, there were better alternatives, and Lufthansa, they owned those planes, and they decided to put them on routes, for instance, to hot and high destinations, Latin America, where they could still, let's say, minimize the bleeding coming from those airplanes. If you look at an operator like Virgin Atlantic, there were also A340-600 operators. Well, when there was something better in the markets, they simply could just wait for the termination of the lease contract and hand those planes back. And usually the values, the market values of those airplanes were quite a bit lower than the anticipated residual value of the airplane type that the investor had figured out. So it's, I think with the same thing with the 777s, with more of those planes coming into the market off lease, 330s as well. This is a typical, I would say, flag carrier airplane, and there may be some secondary operators that could use them, but they're certainly not going to pay the same type of lease rates. Take into account, in addition, that you have to pay quite a lot of money to transition those airplanes because you have to pay a maintenance bill, interior reconfiguration, etc., etc. And I would say the 777 and the 330 problems were already in the making prior to the COVID crisis. You could say that a crisis, it's a time accelerator. So what normally could have taken maybe 3 or 4 years was just accelerated due to the crisis. Okay, talking about the airplane values and the 777-300 in ER in particular. It's an interesting that just prior to the COVID crisis starting, there was an ISTAT conference early 2020, and there was an appraiser panel where we asked the appraisers if they could put a value to a 2017 build 777-300ER. And at that time, between the 5 appraisers, the CMV, so the current market value, varied between 85 and 123 million. So that's a wide range. And I thought, okay, that's not to point any fingers at appraisers, etc. It's just to look at, okay, how things can really change in a short period. So I looked now at the latest value guides I got from 2 of those 5 appraisers, and number 1, I call them appraiser number 1, their CMV has dropped now to 34. I think there's about 50 million that came off, and even the base values, which are supposed to represent, let's say, the long-term achievable value in an equilibrium market, dropped significantly to 47. The other appraiser, who has one of the highest, dropped from, I would say, about 120 to 86 million in their base, but their base value remains somewhat, well, I wouldn't say unchanged, but still relatively high. So I was just wondering, this can happen in a very short time span. So yeah, it's unfair. Nobody could have predicted the COVID crisis, but I mean, it's even the base values, which are again long-term values, that have been adjusted. So I was just wondering what's going on. Sorry. Especially the difference in the current, so the 2021 numbers. So the question is, what's going on? Is this a reluctance with appraisal firms to make changes? Because maybe that could trigger negative client responses. I can imagine if you've just invested 500 million into commercial airplanes based on an appraisal of 700 million, and a year or 2 later, you get an appraisal from the same firm, and it says it's only, let's say, 250 million. Yeah, although it's irrational, but the client may not respond that favorable to this. The other element, the other argument that we've learned is the fear of leading the market. And that's a valid argument. It's an argument that maybe as a professional appraiser, it's important, again, for commercial, but also for methodology reasons. If you know that a certain aircraft type, like a 777, is probably about to fall off the cliff or to suffer significant value loss, but there's no evidence yet in the market based on the transactions that you know, well, it's quite difficult then to say, well, I think that next year that value will drop significantly, already taking that into account. So that fear of leading the market is I think it's a real argument. It's something that if you work for an investor or a bank, it's easier to deal with, because if I have to defend a certain case to my credit committee, or if you're a credit officer and you want to let's say put some question mark with a certain case, you're more free to say, well, you know, it's a nice airplane now, but because this and the other reason, we believe it's going to drop off the cliff next year or 2 years from now, because of there's replacement technology, that market demands is dry up. And the third element could just be, especially for those large airplanes, when they've been on lease for most of the time for maybe 10, 12 years, there's simply a lack of data. And then it becomes more, well, guesswork. I guess putting a value on an A320 or 777 or a 737 is quite a bit more difficult than putting it on a 777. Again, the appraiser community is pretty they know their stuff, but it's quite challenging to come up with the right value. So again, this is not pointing any fingers. It's just something as an industry observer to take into account, also for let's say for future learning cases. Now, going on from the 777, I won't dwell too much on the other airplanes, and this is the 330, which also started its descent way before the COVID crisis, and the same is applicable to the 777-200ER. The 777-300ER, as well as the 330-300, those 2 airplanes seem to be now good candidates for cargo conversion. I don't expect that this will really make these aircraft values bounce back, but it could stop the bleeding. And although it's early days for the 777-300ER, this could become an interesting high volume cargo plane, maybe for the integrator market. And I'm really eager to see what's coming out of that conversion. Maybe it can absorb quite a few 777 passenger planes to become freighters in the future, like in the old days, the DC-10s and the DC-8s. Then the 777-200ER, it looked like this is not going to be. It looks like it's not going to be the plane as the feedstock for cargo conversion. It seems that well, that plane has been skipped, and that it's a 777-300ER that's going to serve as the platform for conversion. Then we go on to the freighters themselves. Yeah, and obviously in line with the huge demand for freighter capacity and the lack of equipment in the market, no surplus like the other planes. Those lease rates values have stayed fairly stable. If we look at the 767-300ER, it's a very old design already, but it's still a very, very useful airplane, very popular with the e-commerce and the integrators. And I think at this point in time, any 767-300ER that's coming available in the market, it's gobbled up and converted to a freighter. Probably something that will not last that long, as we now see affordable A330s appearing on the horizon. There's a huge demand for conversion slots, and apart from EFW, Hilbert Flugzeugwerke, which is the Airbus conversion house, also Israeli Aircraft Industry (IAI) has stepped into that conversion market. I must say it's always a bit worrying when you see this enthusiasm for cargo conversion. We saw that also years ago for the 747-400. And that didn't really end too well. That the converted freighter was not that popular for a long time. Again, the 777-200 LRAF, it's a unique airplane so far. That's the factory freighter. It stayed also quite stable in terms of value, but its unique freighter position just below the 8F. It's probably coming under pressure in the next couple of years, as Airbus and Boeing are going to launch their freighter versions of their current generation of jets. So then the narrow bodies, the 320 CEO current engine option and the 737-800, they were of course best of class for many years, and there was no superior alternative in the market in this very, very popular market segment. So we saw that these market values have been relatively stable over time. 737, the 800, same thing, just a bit of a tail off of that value, but it seems to be, as I understand, picking up a bit. Now, if you look at the chart like this for the A220, you say, well, that's great, it's a very stable value. You always have to ask the question, is the history a good indicator for the future? Because as said, in that period, let's say from the 90s on, this was the best aircraft that money could buy in the narrow body. And now we have a better airplane, the Neo, and for the Boeing 737, the MAX. So I'm expecting that this trend, the downward trend in values for both aircraft type, will maybe even accelerate a little bit as the MAXes and the Neos come into the market. So yeah, I guess if fuel prices would rise, or if environmental requirements, ESG requirements, would be increasing, then I think we could see even a further acceleration of the retirement wave of these airplanes, and that could of course have significant implications for the values of those airplanes. Okay, this is kind of a generic chart that I've used to show to colleagues and at conferences what happens to airplane generation changes. It's a bit of a complex chart. I'll walk you through it. The red bars, they are basically the era where there was a crisis, an aviation crisis, which is essentially, it's the translation of a negative revenue passenger kilometer growth. So negative growth. Those are the four columns where that happened. The kind of, I call it brown yellow line is the 737-300 values. Again, constant age. The blue ones are the NGs, the 800 in this case, constant H, and the greens are the max. So just to explain what I try to symbolize here is that you have the airplane values going up and down. They may be hit by a crisis, but as there's nothing else, nothing better in the market, the 300 recovered value, and actually more than that. So then there was a next crisis coming up, and you could see that both the older type at the time, the 300, and the 800, which was the new incoming aircraft type, were suffering from that crisis. However, what happened next is that the 800 recovered again to the full, while the 300 stayed in that let's say lower level. This is for different vintages, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. You can also see there's a bit of value convergence going on. Value convergence being that if airplanes grow older, nobody's really interested whether this is an 18 or a 20-year-old plane. It's just the maintenance condition that matters. So if you look at this replacement cycle, it's not unlikely that we'll now, with the MAX going back into service, that we'll see the 737-800, the previous generation, go down more than it's in the past. So I don't expect that this will recover to the full. Actually, it's probably it's beginning of the end for that airplane type. More so if we have higher fuel prices, and the more so probably also as more airplanes have been leased rather than owned by the airlines. Because if you have a leased airplane, as I said before, it's easier to return them. So looking to the future, with COVID, I mean, in some cases it was quite possible to predict what would happen to aircraft values. The 777 and the 330-300 are good examples that you could see this coming. But what of course is very difficult, if not impossible, is to predict when a next downturn, a next crisis will materialize and what will cause it. That is, if you can do that, I think you're not participating in this conference. You're probably somewhere on a nice tropical island sipping your pina coladas. So it's very difficult, if not impossible, to predict anything, because we've seen crises in the past caused by terrorism, by diseases, by economic downturns, etc., wars. Now, what are things that could potentially cause another crisis? Maybe short term, maybe 10 years from now. That's, of course, I think it was described by the SAS CEO as the wall of debt that airlines are facing. And despite the fact that it looks like we're getting into a better shape in the industry, there's still almost every day that you read about airline bankruptcies. I think I just saw a message pop up about Blue Panorama being in a difficult position, but also some of the major Asian carriers. You just have to wonder if they can survive as they are, or whether there will be a restructuring, which is de facto default going to happen. So it's not over yet, definitely. And as mentioned before, rising fuel prices. And I guess it was London Heathrow that announced, and Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam as well, announced huge infrastructure cost increases, which will make the ticket prices a lot more expensive and make it more difficult for the consumers passengers to travel. Political conflict, if there would be an escalation, and we all have to hope this is not going to happen in Asia, in Taiwan, China, US situation. Afghanistan, is this a new area where terrorism could develop itself and spread all over the world? Variation on the COVID crisis, on the COVID virus, the Delta Plus variant, or maybe some even worse variants, we don't know. An economic or a monetary crisis. I think we've handled the COVID crisis so far very well, but it also, maybe in some ways, it seems like we're kind of living in a bubble, and as long as the confidence is in place and nothing happens, that's fine, and we can still inflate the bubble. But if confidence goes away, really, then that could be a very big impact on the economy. Of course, environmental legislation or taxation. Governments are always happy to levy new taxes, and if the taxman can wear a green mask nowadays, that's going to be very popular. The freighter demand, the freighter market, again, it's hugely popular right now. Freighters are the hottest commodity, but if, let's say, in the near future, belly cargo would come back, passenger flights, the maritime box market would normalize, And there would be this, let's say, accelerated introduction of converted freighter that may cause also some problems in that segment of the market. Air cargo has been notoriously volatile for as long as I can remember. And then, of course, this is a concern that we hear from our own credit people quite often. Yeah, what's going to happen to the values of the current generation airplanes when we will see mandatory by government regulation or just because technology moves to new airplane designs or new engine designs. The introduction of a new engine, I think CFMI mentioned the RISE engine for introduction into the 2030s. If that really comes along, then it could accelerate the depreciation of late build generation airplanes, so-called last of the line. IATA committed to 0 CO2 emissions by 2050. That's a very interesting challenge because even with improved fuel efficiency, improved aerodynamics, that's really not gonna make it. And so we really need something like either a SAF, alternative aviation fuel, or even further down the road, hydrogen powered airplanes, which is still a very, very big challenge for the engineers. It could have an impact, of course, on those last of the line of an old generation. Compare it to the move from the propeller airplane like a Lockheed Electra to the jet age. Of course, the investor bubble may burst as well if they start to realize that a lot of the residual values that they assumed are not going to be realized. That could be nasty. And of course, green legislation, and we see that already with a lot of banks, could start moving banks or financiers away from financing anything that has to do with aviation, because aviation has this, let's say, somewhat negative image in the market with politicians for its impact on the environment. So finally, maybe some things that were more predictable and that we have to look at. So the worst case, as we figured out in terms of aircraft value dynamics, is when you have the combination of a market downturn, so a drop in demand, and a generation change. Because with this drop in demand, there will be surplus, and airlines will, if they have a choice, go for the latest and greatest technology. It seems that generally in a downturn, wide bodies are hit harder than narrow bodies. It seems also that regional jets are quite vulnerable, including to what I call scope clauses in the US market. US is a very big market for regional jets. And if the scope clauses, which basically limit the size of commuter airplanes that can be used, if that changes, that could have an impact. Interesting to see what's happening in the turboprop market. Basically, with for the time being, the Q400 out of production. The ATR 4272 seems to be the only in production Western built airplane, and we wonder if this airplane will become a kind of a bigger version of the vulnerable twin otter airplanes that were very popular for a long time. Actually, production resumed. Freighter conversions are very popular, but we think there could be a potential oversupply in this volatile market. And finally, the no-brainers at the moment that are quite popular with the investors are the NEOs, the MAX 8, the G-powered 789, the 350-900, potentially the A220, formerly known as the C-series, and the 330-900. Then again, there are some less popular airplanes. The short-bodied airplane, the NEO family, the 319, doesn't really seem to be taking off yet in terms of number of operators. Sales volume is not that bad, but it's the number of operators that is worrying us. The MAX 7 and the MAX 9, bit under pressure. The stretch 350, the 1000, the 330-800, which is not selling well. And then the 7878, which was quite popular initially, but it's been superseded by the 9. And the 10, which is, although it's huge, it has a significant range, it's still by some seen as a little bit shorter range. And the 777X, which is an airplane, longer term future, probably very good, especially for operators, but it's not a plane that's reflecting the spirit of 2021, where the intercontinental long-haul big airplanes are not that popular. And then, of course, for those which are brave, we could see a relatively huge value correction for 777, 300ER or 330-300. And that may offer some interesting some upside potential. Let's assume that the values have overshot in negative direction. Maybe if you if you like a gamble, those airplanes could be interesting for the investors with guts. With that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I think we still have a bit of time for questions and maybe some answers. Niels, you were the master of ceremonies. I'll hand it over to you.
Sarah is the master of questions.
Sarah. Hi, Sarah.
Well, we can share this role. Thank you, Bert, for this very interesting presentation. You've got a lineup of questions from the audience, and I'm going to try to go through as many as time allows us to. I'm going to kind of randomly go through a couple. So one of the questions that was asked was, what does the 777 value evolution imply for the 777X?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think the 777, the announcement by Boeing of the 777X, I guess, contributed to this. It was clear that Boeing, they needed to answer, well, the Airbus 350 product, which was, I would say, launched as a 777 killer, and they had to do something. And apparently there was no, the plans didn't allow for a green, entirely clean sheet design, although there's a lot of changes to the X compared to the 300ER. Well, I think the more or less separately from this, the market dynamics now with the slowdown in intercontinental travel, and maybe a bit of a move towards smaller long-haul airplane. We have the 321 XLR that can do transatlantic stretches quite easily. Maybe, well, you remember, of course, that there was always the discussion whether it should be the smaller 787 or the big A380 that's the winner. I think for the time being, it looks like it's the smaller airplanes that are the flavor of the month currently. Maybe it will change in the future. So I think at this point in time, 777X, I think it's going to be a tough airplane to sell in larger numbers for the time being. As the market is moving to long haul, well, let's say slightly below that, 350-900 or 787-9, maybe things will come back. Obviously, airport congestion, airspace congestion may play in the hands of the 777X, and so yeah, I don't write it off at all. I think it's for certain operators an excellent airplane. But it seems to be not really what the market wants at this point in time.
Okay, moving on to the next one. Do you see any corrections with 787-8s and 9s in terms of use and values?
Well, I think the 8 was the airplane that a lot of airlines ordered because it was the first one available, and I think. Yeah, this is an industry where, of course, a lot of things are calculated and it's all very, very scientific. But I noticed that there's still a bit of, let's say, I wouldn't call it hobbyism, but it's still nice if you're in charge of an airline or fleet planning to have this latest and greatest airplane. It's also for the image. So I think a lot of airlines were quite eager to get their hands on the initial 787, which was the 8. But the 9, with just, I would say, it's of course it's more expensive, but then it offers you a lot more revenue potential, and I think also a bit more. It doesn't go at the expense of range as you normally have. So I would expect that the 9 is going to be for the time being the most popular one. The 8, the current, let's say the initial 8. It's a good startup airline if you want, as an airline, let's say second-tier airline, you want to go into the era of the new technology planes. But I don't see that resulting in significantly increases in aircraft value. There's always the discussion around the engine. The Rolls engines, of course, there was a bit of an issue technically, reliability. So that may have a bit of a negative impact, I guess, on how desirable that engine is, although the problem seemed to be solved. Maybe if there would be a lower cost, let's say 787-8 light version that would have good economics, there could be something. I know that Boeing has changed the airframe structure and the structure of the I think the aft end of the plane. But for the time being, I would put my money more on the 787-9 with GE power. That seems to be more popular than the Rolls powered plane at the moment. And then the 10 stretch plane that has very good economics. But yeah, for whatever reason, although it's still pretty range capable, it seems to be, compared to some of the competing products that you know pretty well, I guess, it has a bit of the image of having some range shortfall. And maybe a 10ER, it's if history is to repeat itself, like with the 767, it started with 200, then the 300, the stretch version, became really popular, and then the 300ER was the real winner. So a 10ER could be that. Although on the other hand, I also have to mention that the 400, 767-400 was not a real impressive success in the market. So maybe that was a stretch too far, or it was competing with a what I would call by almost all standards a superior design in the fall of the 330.
Right. Thanks for that.
I hope I'm Airbus friendly in these.
Be careful.
You are. Also, so shifting gears a little, what is the view on portfolio impairments and subsequent trading of aircraft with the massive drop in CMVs?
Sorry, could you repeat the first part? I didn't really get. Sorry.
What is the view on portfolio impairments and subsequent trading of aircraft with the massive drop of current market values?
Impairments, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not that visible in the market. Leasing companies are generally, they're owned by financially strong shareholders. So as long as you can hold out for the market to recover, I mean, the pain is not visible. It's not, you don't see that in the market. I think that's probably part of the story, that there is pain. Definitely there is pain, and maybe with some of the investment vehicles, there's a bit of pain, and especially I would say, I know that there have been in the Far East investors that were focusing very heavily on 777-300s and A380s, and clearly those airplanes have dropped in value. I think both, again, to be balancing Airbus and Boeing against each other. So I cannot escape that. I cannot believe that there's no pain there. If you're talking about the more generic portfolios with the 737, the 320s, yeah, I think, of course, there's a bit of pressure there, but I think we can wait for the market to recover, to stabilize. I think that should not be that problematic.
But what if you're not owned by a big financial institution as a lessor? I mean, what is the outlook there?
Oh, we've seen a few, including in the regional space, and those stories. I don't want to mention the name, but there was really pressure there, and I was actually surprised in one case in particular, where very shortly after the crisis started, a major lessor in that space was in trouble. We saw some other smaller lessors with some emphasis on the regional airplanes that was not owned by a major investor. And I mean, that has been it's no secret. There's been the press that some of those lessors really came under pressure. And then, of course, yeah, it's a matter: do you really pull the plug, or as a financier of that lessor, do you work with them, and do you basically give them enough space to recover and wait for the market to come back? So, but it's like that financial institutions. If you would publicize, or there would be some rumor in the market, as a financial institution, you have a problem. There's a run to the bank the day after. So I think also with leasing companies, you don't really want to go out and be open about any problems that you have. I mean, if you restructure your lease contract with your lessee, then you can probably the next day say to your investor, to the public, to the press, that there's none of our lessees are behind. I mean, there's always a way to dress up these situations. But maybe I'm an old cynic here, Niels. So.
We have some more questions. Okay, so Bert, let me ask you something in the interim. You mentioned an interesting dichotomy between the investor demand and the airline demand. Okay, now, and people are crying about these rental factors and so on and so forth. Now, what do you think that means?
Well, I mean, I think it means, first of all, that there's probably too much money around looking to be invested in airplanes. If we talk to some of the investors, and you know, at DVB Bank, where I came from, we had a bit of that activity in-house ourselves. This was extremely competitive. There was for any, let's say, somewhat attractive portfolio or a sale-leaseback transaction, there were dozens of interested parties, and in some cases we thought we would be submitting a very, very competitive bid, and we were still beaten by a mile by some other investors. At the moment, we see a very surprising comeback of the ABS.
In the interest of time, yeah, we've got some more questions. I know Niels is dying to ask his own.
Well,
should we let Bert finish on this one?
Yeah, it's I've lost. I was really distracted there. So yeah, I think I think it's mainly that there is just a bit too much money chasing too few deals, which we have seen prior to the crisis, but that investment money has not been discouraged. And actually, I think what we see now is this popularity of the ABS. To be honest, I think there's almost 10 or maybe even more than that ABS is currently in the market or about to be launched. And I guess if you are doing the structuring, or you're building a portfolio, maybe with a bridge financing, and you're counting on the exit through an ABS, I mean, that's quite an attractive proposition, because you basically figure out that your risk will be very short-lived. That goes for the financier as well as the initial investor, and then you can basically move that portfolio to other investors. So, and those are eager, because if you are running a pension fund and you have some pension obligations to meet in the next couple of years, where do you get the return? So it's a chase for yields, and airplanes, I guess, rightfully so, are still seen as a very attractive asset to put your investment money in, your pension fund.
Yeah. Sarah, are you having a delay issue? Can you hear us okay? Okay, I think we're having a little bit of a technical problem on Sarah's end. So I'll just bring in a question in the meantime that came in from Oliver Clark. What could the impact of raising interest rates be on the airline and leasing sector?
That's a good question, of course, and a lot. There will be many implications. I guess I would expect if interest rates go up, just to continue on the topic that we're discussing, I think that investor money will probably move out to alternative investment targets. Because then, it's maybe back into bonds, real estate, whatever. So that money may pull out, which could have a negative effect on, as I said, the stimulus that's been exercised by this money onto aircraft values. If that would disappear, then clearly it would be an issue. Of course, and I think that's probably not an elephant in the room, but a mammoth somewhere. What would be the impact of refinancing of these of the huge corporate loans that have been taken out during the crisis to get the liquidity? So I think it will be extremely difficult for airlines to deal with that. But then on top of that, also on the macroeconomic side, governments that have been borrowing money at very low interest rates, if those rates would shoot up, that's also then an avenue that would be closed down. So there's a lot of implications of a That's if it's gradual, it's probably we can deal with it. But if we have, for whatever reason, a fairly steep increase, then I think it's going to be a bit of chaos, and that was one of the risks that I've signaled as well, that you could some disruption of financial markets, many things. But again, any shocks we should try to avoid, obviously.
Yeah, but coming back to the lease rental factors, I mean, before we jump to the conclusion that the investor community is stupid, could it be simply that what we're facing here is a combination of quite low interest rates with very high inflation, and that residual values in US dollars would
I'm not saying they're stupid at all, to the contrary, but it's what's your risk appetite? And airplanes have the image, of course, of being quite a good hedge against inflationary risks. Again, that's depending on which airplane you've put your money in. But I said, I think it's if you can pass on part of the risk to another investor or share that risk, then of course that makes the decision a bit easier. Certainly not accusing any of the investors or the lessors of being stupid. To the contrary.
Actually, no, you guys are breaking up.
Okay. Do you have a question, Sarah, now that you could?
Yes, I cannot hear you guys properly. I'm sorry.
But we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. All right. So there is another question from Peter Hubers. Do you think that you're going to see yield levels recover to 2019 levels? And would that help the airlines recover all the debts related to COVID-19 that the airlines are taking on?
Yeah. Hi, Peter. Good question, as always. I think the airlines obviously need to do that, and in those situations where the competition level was still quite low on some of the routes that were during this crisis not serviced by many airlines, we saw unbelievably high ticket prices, i.e. yields. But I do see that further down the road, when all the airlines are going to fight to get more passengers, that I think there will be very limited possibility to increase ticket prices. And if fuel prices go up, if infrastructure prices move up, that again would eat away from any of those potential ticket price or yield increases. So I think I don't see an era where the airlines are, this is in general around the world, where the airlines are going to be hugely profitable in, let's say, in the near future. It's always been a very competitive market. We also saw quite a number of startup airlines. Probably not even half of that startup airline group will make it. But if you look at the US, where we have Breeze, and there's all kinds of weird and wonderful names of startup airlines, I think it will. Well, the aviation industry has always been quite competitive. Maybe North America it's limited capacity, limited competition. But again, somebody like Breeze could bring a bit more competition. I think North America probably is the region where I think the profitability will be restored first, because it's an established and mature market, and I don't see any foreign competition in the domestic US market.
Sarah, do you have a better connection now? Can you hear us? Okay, apparently not. So I'll go ahead with the next question. Doug Kelly is asking, given the challenges of meeting ESG requirements, high fuel prices, high percentages of leased aircraft, what do you think the useful economic life should be for a narrow-body and wide-body aircraft?
Well, again, it's basically we would look at the scenario when do we expect this next technology wave to hit the market. I would expect probably around 30, 35 in the narrow body market, not really revolutionary, but evolutionary, maybe a bit like the move from the CEO to the NEO. So from calculating backwards from that, I would say the useful economic life can be, I have to differentiate that from the, let's say, the value life, because we still have MD-80s flying around, but that value is negligible. Well, just not to try to avoid a real answer, I would say that.
Unfortunately not. You guys are still breaking up, so I don't want to ruin the session for everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
But
we can
you
hear
hear us like 3 minutes after we speak.
Yeah.
So it's a problem there.
So I think that actually that assumption that wide bodies have a longer life, I think I would put some question marks there. So maybe really in terms of depreciation life, I would say 20 years is kind of what I would see as the maximum, not for the technical life, they will fly on, but economic. I'm not taking into account any conversion, etc., etc. But I think it's, given where we are and huge pressure to become more environmental friendly, I wouldn't count on really a long economic life of the current generation, in particular not aircraft, new generation airplanes that are going to be produced, let's say, towards the second half of this decade. The initial versions of the CEO and of the Neo and the Max, I think they'll be okay, they'll be longer. But I would not be too optimistic about the new generations, let's say, the new generation last of the lines. Depending, of course, and yeah, long answer, but depending, of course, if we have a sustainable SAF that can be produced in sufficient quantities, and that obviously we will be able to use that in the current aero engines. Yeah, that could change the picture, but I'm wondering if that's going to be enough to achieve the 2050 goals of zero CO2 emissions.
Yeah. Don Kelly has, sorry, Toko Tsuge has asked actually quite an involved question here. First of all, he wants to thank you for an excellent presentation, so he was very pleased with that. He's referring to your pages 10 and 11 on this presentation, the storage percentages, and versus the page 14 values. He is asking, have you confirmed any acceleration of early retirements of fleets?
I think it's no, to be honest. I don't think we've seen that. We've seen part out of, let's say, the less popular short-bodied airplanes. I think actually the retirements have been relatively low, probably because it makes sense still to wait for the market to come back. I mean, the worst case scenario is if you have your airplane back, you park it in the desert, you decide to retire, and then the next year the market is booming again, and you could have sold it. So I haven't, but I may have missed something, but I haven't seen a significant increase in retirement yet. And again, these planes that drop off the cliff, the 777-300ER and the 330, I think we probably will see a lot of those. I expect a lot of those to be coming back with a cargo door in the fuselage.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, could the lack of part out also be due to lack of demand for parts? Yes, obviously. That's with planes not flying, you can postpone that. And that has happened. I think there is. I saw some of the traders that expect when those planes are coming back into service, the demand for parts will probably be increasing quite a bit in the next couple of years. Right. Yeah. Good point. But Sharon McKenna is asking if you do believe that the scope clauses in the US will change. Hi, Sarah. I don't think there's any indication for the time being that that will happen. So, I mean, some airplane programs have been designed speculating they would change. It hasn't happened. And personally, given where we are, I don't think it will change, and certainly not, let's say, moving upwards for the time being. Yeah, no. So my answer is, I may be wrong, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. Yeah. All right. I think that's basically all the questions. I'm sorry that it seems like Sarah has a connection issue and that there is a delay. Between when we talk and she can hear us. We will try for better luck next Tuesday at 10 o'clock New York time. So remember, for the Europeans, it's going to change then by an hour because of the change back to wintertime in the US this coming weekend. We're going to hear about supersonic travel from the CEO of Boom Supersonic at the Learning Lab on the 9th of November. So welcome back for that. And we want to thank Sarah for participating in the moderation, and for Bert for delivering a very interesting presentation. This will be posted online in a few days, so you can review it and tell your friends about it and let them see if they missed it today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ISTAT, for the invitation, and Niels, thank you for being a great host. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Bye now.